just heard the stream load and I can hear. I don't. This really pisses me off. I think my internet's dying. All right, testing Twitch 1 2 3 1 2 3.
Testing Twitch 1 2 3 1 2 3.
We're good there. Go to YouTube. I gotta refresh first. All right, we should be good.
All right. Hello and welcome to episode 186 of the Ego Chall Podcast. My name is Preston Byers, and as always, I'm joined by my co-host Justin Binkowski. And on today's episode, we are celebrating the end of the 2025 CDL season because today we witnessed history. Did we not, Bink? We witnessed the first team in not only Call of Duty League history, but in Call of Duty esports history to win back-to-back championships, back-to-back world championships. So we're going to break it down. OpTic Texas becoming that first team, having this incredible turnaround late in the season to win the championship for the second consecutive year. And there's a lot else that we will talk about. I'm sure this will be quite a bit of a long episode talking about champs. But before we get into any of that, how are you doing, Bink?
Yeah, doing all right. Like you said, pretty upset-filled and extremely entertaining weekend of COD Champs. I think for those who tuned in to our preview show where we were kind of mostly seriously but partially joking that it felt like there's a lot of chalk going in and that we had an inkling that something might happen, but we weren't able to pinpoint exactly where the upset would be or anything like that. Well, that was blown out of the water because there were upsets aplenty, and there's a whole bunch to dive into, so I'm not going to waste any more time. We can just get right to it.
Yeah, OpTic themselves being part of that upset culture at Champs this year. We talked about it in the preview, how that first round match was going to be very highly anticipated. OpTic versus Atlanta FaZe. We talked to and we've discussed all season long how Atlanta has had OpTic's number, had not lost to them, I believe, at all this season, had beaten them 5 or 6 times consecutively coming in. Draza, since he had joined the team before last season, was 11-1, and Atlanta FaZe was 11-1 against OpTic, and it all goes out of the window in the very first round of this tournament. OpTic beats FaZe 3-0. Then OpTic just keeps rolling from there. They 3-0 Toronto, 3-0 Boston, which we'll get to in the winners finals to get to the grand finals to get to championship Sunday. And they don't sweep the Vancouver Surge, but they still win the grand finals 5-3 and very crucially beat Vancouver in their best game mode since Neptune came into the roster, and that was Hardpoint in all 3 of those maps. And like I said at the top of the show, OpTic, with this win, becomes the very first organization, franchise, however you want to frame it. They're the first team to win back-to-back championships in Call of Duty esports. It has never been done before, or I guess it had never been done before. We've seen similar rosters. We've seen, obviously, players go back-to-back, but we had never seen OpTic, the franchise, the team, going back-to-back and crowning themselves champions in consecutive years, which is pretty historic considering these are probably 2 of the most improbable championship runs of any team ever. Last year, we talked extensively about how OpTic looked dead in the water and were at risk of getting double first rounded last season. Then they go and they win champs anyway. This year, we will get into the more nitty gritty, but they were among the very, very worst teams in the league at one point, and not for just like a single point. It seemed like for a month-long stretch, they were among the worst teams in the league, and it was even in doubt that they would even make it to champs at the final major of the season. Not only do they make it to champs, they have one of the most dominant runs of any team in champs history. So first and foremost, your overall general reaction to OpTic Texas going back-to-back at champs.
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty hard to describe it in brief terms, in my opinion. But like, you really have to preface it with kind of what you were teeing up there. Like, this team literally went back to back top 8 placings, had legitimate multiple roster changes. I don't know why I said legitimate there. I don't know what I was thinking, but made several roster changes throughout the entire year. Had a stretch during the major 2 qualifiers where they went 0-18 map count, lost 18 straight maps, and they entered the final major of the season, major 4, without a champs placing even being guaranteed. They were going in as potentially looking to secure that 8th and final spot, and then obviously some things worked out their way and happened so that they got the 7th seed going into champs. But like, going into that final event, they weren't even guaranteed to be in a position to win this tournament or even attend the tournament, let alone win it. So really, I mean, and credit to OpTic in terms of, it's obviously easy to look back on it now and just be like, yeah, that's in the past, and what happens, done and dusted. But like, they haven't shied away from talking about what happened earlier in the season, even in like the post-match interviews and stuff. And I saw some clips on Twitter of Shotzi referring to it as like really dark times early in the season. It's like, it's very easy, to be in their position now and be like, yeah, we won champs, so who cares about the rest? Like, obviously that's the mindset you can have because of what happened. But like, it's a credit to them too, that they're not totally running away from all the adversity and everything they faced early on this season. And I really do, it's hard to succulently put it into words, but I'm happy for the guys on OpTic for being able to pull this off. Really happy for Merc and Hook in particular. Mercury's was a beast all weekend, and Hook getting another ring now, that just further solidifies his legacy, which we talked about during our legacy check episode. But obviously now, Dashy joins the two ring camp as well. Same Shotzi now. Has 3, so tied for the most. Shotzi has 4 rings if you count the Halo ring too. So
Yeah.
already one of the undisputed best FPS players of all time. I'm sure we'll get into like rankings for Call of Duty specific greats and all that over the next couple weeks when we got some downtime and whatnot. But yeah, like you said, this tournament, it really, like, I think I texted it to you early on, like, it, at least the first couple series they played, it literally felt like OpTic were the only team that actually practiced over these last couple of weeks between Major 4 and Champs, and like every other team was just taking the time off or not working. At least that's how dominant their gameplay looked. It felt like they were just leaps and bounds ahead of everyone they were squaring up against. And I was really speechless. Like, heading into the grand finals, they didn't have a map dropped. They win the first map of the grand finals today, and I texted Rule and I was like, in hindsight, it'd be kind of funny if Vancouver Surge got 0-5s in these grand finals and had a no map wins in 3 grand finals this year, which obviously, that didn't happen. And we got a really, really great grand finals, and Vancouver Surge is another awesome story in general as well, that we'll get to. But yeah, just really, I mean, the series today was obviously much tougher and very hard fought, and it was some really good Call of Duty being displayed. But especially on their path to getting to the Champs Grand Finals, just OpTic looked like on a totally different level than what we had seen all year from this team. And that is something that I mentioned. Um, I don't think it was necessarily in the preview, but I just know that I've talked about it since they've brought Merc into the squad. Like, it's only been a couple of weeks at that time. They have this break coming up to build on uh, the foundation of just a couple weeks of playing with him, and they have time to get more reps in, work on some stuff, and see how they can improve. And I really think it's a credit to all the guys, the coaches, JP and Karma, all four guys on the squad. Like it's very evident to me that they definitely put in some work, and it paid off in the long run.
Shout out JT and Midnight in the chat. It's undoubtable that they are like this coaching staff has to be given a lot of credit, because it could be very easy to just give up and just say, all right, like, do whatever. You guys aren't performing up to standard, and we're not gonna have the run that we thought we would at the beginning of the season. And somehow, and of course credit to the players as well, but like this is back-to-back turnarounds before champs, and I don't think that's a coincidence at all. Granted, they should not have been nearly as bad as they were during this season. They shouldn't have been, scratching and clawing to even get into champs. So like that aside, these 4 to 5 weeks that they had to prepare, it seemed like they really did make the most of this, that they did not just try to coast into champs and try to see what happened. It felt like they were very intentional with what they did, and like you said, it paid off. 9 straight map wins to get to the grand finals, 9-0 going into the grand finals. I think there will be people that will say, well, look who they played, but at the end of the day, like, how could they have predicted that LAT was going to lose first round to Boston? How could they think that Atlanta FaZe would not, like, even if they beat them, like Atlanta wouldn't come back around at some point and be kind of a thorn in their side near the end of the tournament. And it's not like Boston played poorly at all. Like in every other series, Boston was very competitive or won that series, and they just weren't against OpTic. And I think that's more of a testament to OpTic than it is Boston. Like Boston, I believe, won the first 2 series that they played. They get 3-0'd by OpTic, and then they go to a game 5 against Vancouver in the losers finals as well. So, Boston did their part. Vancouver, of course, they go to an 8-map series in the grand finals, which was the most competitive that Vancouver had been, like you mentioned, in the grand finals of any event this season, because they got 0-5'd in Major 2 and Major 3. But yeah, it's just a pretty incredible run in consecutive years for OpTic, in addition to Shotzi, of course, like you said, winning 3 championships now, which automatically, no matter who you are, it elevates you into at least the conversation of the greatest of all time, especially when you're the first player or among the 2 first players to win it in back-to-back years. Like you said, Dashy, we've talked about how this could elevate him into that best AR ever kind of conversation. Hook, I don't know what you could really say. I don't know what his legacy will be at the end of his career, even with 2 championships, but like it's undeniable that like he lived up to some kind of expectation. Like he probably wasn't the best player ever, like Nadeshot laid out for him in 2021 or 22, but he's now won 2 championships, and he was very critical in that. And then Mercury's, what can you honestly say about this? Like this is, there have been rookies to win world championships. Obviously Miracles was the first. So, shout out Mirror. There probably been others like Shotzi and Illy were rookies in the CDL in 2020. There haven't been a lot of other instances. Of course, Attach was a champs rookie, but not a like a pro rookie. So there's not a lot of precedent for this. There's certainly not a precedent for his exact path of coming into Major 3, having never played a CDL match before, is an emergency fill-in for another team. 3 weeks later, he's on OpTic, and he is probably the best player, one of the best players in the league instantly. And then he wins Champs MVP as a rookie, having played, he's probably played, 11 matches, maybe if that, in the CDL now. He played four this weekend. He played maybe 4 or 5. He's probably played more 15-ish.
Qualifier, yeah, 15 sounds. Like
So
because
I don't know what the minimum would be, or what the previous record would be. Fewest pro matches under your belt before you win a championship, but I would imagine he probably has that. So, just an incredible run. And then we didn't even mention Karma, now the first coach, I believe, ever to win 2 championships as well, which he now has 5 rings, which is pretty incredible. Like it kind of adds to his legacy. Back-to-back years as the coach of OpTic, coming in mid-season, if I'm not mistaken, last year or 2 years ago. Yeah. That was 2 years ago. So he's 2 for 3 as a coach, which is, I'd say, pretty good.
He wasn't even like that first.
Yeah, that was
whenever he actually. It was kind of like he was just like helping out a little, and it wasn't official until last year. Yeah,
of course, and but it just adds to his legacy as, not only one of the best players, but now one of the best coaches ever. So there's a lot of historic history implications for this championship. But, Midnight said Hook surpassed everything I expected of him. I think for a long time, so much was expected of him that, like, not winning 2 championships would seem almost like a failure in some way, especially because they won in 2020. And then he went off into the wilderness. It felt like he was just kind of gone forever. It did not seem like he was ever going to get back to that point. And then now to kind of come around, and even this season, like if you had told me in, what was that, February, when he gets replaced by Pred, I'm like, okay, like I guess he might get on like Carolina or New York or something like that near the end of the season. Ultimately, it didn't really matter because he gets back on OpTic, and even with how bad they were in the middle of the season, how much he was personally maligned for that, because I remember people blaming Kenny's troubles for Hook's play style, and now it kind of all looks really silly in retrospect. Not to say that he is blameless in any of this, or the OpTic guys in general are blameless for how bad they played in the middle of the season, but it doesn't matter. It literally, and I said this at the preview show, if they win, and they now have, whatever happened in the middle of the season doesn't matter at all, except it elevates the story and the legacy of this kind of championship. It only helps them that they had such a poor middle of the season. So, it's pretty incredible.
OpTic comes in last place at this champs here, then we're totally different attitude, right? It's like, damn, those mid-season struggles really caught up to them, all the roster changes, yada yada. But now, like I said, like at least I am glad that, like I said, I know Hex mentioned it just like in passing and on the onstage interviews. Shotzi, I saw in like a post-match interview, at least like just bringing up the fact it's not like it's been all sunshine and rainbows this year. They've faced their adversity. They aren't running from what happened. They've accepted it because obviously they can't change anything about it, but they've responded and answered, the critics in the best way possible, which is, winning COD champs. And there was the clip too. We talked about it at the time when it happened, I believe, of Hex on like one of the OpTic podcasts, where he's saying, like, he kept on repeating, like, you're the worst OpTic team ever. And like Dashy was in the chair, like, yo, you don't have to keep saying it. But like, he was like, you're the worst OpTic team ever, but you can become the best OpTic team ever, or something. I'm paraphrasing there, but it was something like that. And like, that's even more like, OpTic already does a great job of creating content, doing the storytelling, all that. But like, that's a clip now that lives on in history, and like you can replay that over and over again with edits of like, Shotzi's like insane 4 or 5 streak on Hacienda in the grand finals, and them lifting the trophy and stuff, and that just goes insanely hard. But I do think, we can probably sit here and talk, for probably an entire episode on just OpTic alone. One thing I'm sure we will dive into more probably in another episode, but just something I feel like needs to be said at this time while we're on the topic of OpTic is really, uh, how we talked about the struggles and everything like that, but like literally, if Beans doesn't have
Yeah.
visa issues at Major 3, this entire conversation is potentially just doesn't happen, completely out the window. Like, you can literally say Beans's visa issues are the reason for OpTic's winning champs in 2025, and obviously you got to connect the dots and everything, so don't go jump down my neck or anything like that, but it is funny, and I saw some funny points play like Breaking Point or ever trying to tie it back to Octane and Octane retiring and splitting up the LAT team that won champs, and they were joking on the flank and everything like that, but like in all seriousness, like Beans' visa issues put Merc on the map.
Oh, yeah.
And we have talked multiple episodes of this podcast now of do Toronto regret it? Like, now we were kind of like, a little wishy-washy on it. We were both in the camp of like, they probably should regret it, but like you can kind of live with it, depending on what the financials exchanging hands were, yada yada. But like, now that kid wins champs MVP, wins champs, like there is no ifs, ands, or buts about it. Like, yes, Toronto has to regret letting Merc fall through the cracks and go to OpTic. And literally, like, that's just in essentially 2 months, maybe it's a little more than 2 months, Merc goes from emergency sub to champs MVP. It's just that there are multiple ways, and I'm sure a lot of the Green Wall are excited for like a documentary or a vision or whatever OpTic is going to put out about this season. But like, man, there are so many cool storylines and narratives that you can tie into everything that's happened this season for OpTic. Even, again, as we mentioned, like with the Green Wall expects championships. And when you have those struggles like they did earlier in the year, it feels like things are never going to get better, and it's real rough and all that. But like, you tie in all that adversity and connect it with winning champs at the end, I think all of them are signing up for that, and I think it just makes the storyline that much sweeter and even cooler.
Yeah, I don't know what we ended up deciding on for the biggest what if of the CDL season when we did our award show, but with hindsight, it is obviously now Beans' whole visa situation. Just him not being able to compete at all. Toronto either not being able to sign or just not deciding to sign Mercury's after that event. There's so many what ifs that just come from that single Major 3. Now, it's probably one of the biggest turning points in Call of Duty esports history, because I can't remember a single event that really had that many at least short-term implications. We'll see what the long-term looks like as well, but it has essentially propelled Mercury's to the very top of Call of Duty esports within 2 months, which is unprecedented for something like that to happen on this kind of stage. And I'm so happy it happened. I'm so happy, like, even if OpTic had not won, I'm happy for Mercury's, because he was obviously talented, right? Like, there were people that were saying he's a very good player in challengers, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to get the opportunity to get up to the next level when you really need to or when you really deserve to. He gets that opportunity. He's able to just show all of these CDL teams what he can do playing against the best of the best. And now he is like undoubtedly, like, I would believe he's under contract past this season. If not, man, he's about to get a massive bag, because he can basically play off any single team. Like, any team, regardless of their roster situation, would love to have him on their team. So he can have leverage basically wherever he goes.
I will say, shout out Matt McGinty in YouTube chat, said that the Toronto owner tweeted about the Merc situation. I didn't see it because he tweeted this 7:30, so literally an hour ago. But he said for Ultra and Koi fans asking about Mercury's, he joined us on a 2-week loan from Omit. We offered him a full contract right away. He waited for free agency, which was a smart move. And with lots of interest, he signed with OpTic. So that does answer a lot of the questions that we were saying. Like, we didn't know what type of contract he would have signed. if there was necessarily a buyout situation involved. If it was literally just, the short-term subcontract, he was a free agent, he picked to go to OpTic, like, that's just, that smart business move on his part for multiple reasons. Even if they didn't win champs, that's just a great business move because of the fans and everything he could have accrued over these past couple of weeks just playing for OpTic, and especially playing the way he played. OpTic fans immediately fell in love with the kid. So I guess that does, that's one side of the story. I'm going to take the Toronto owner's word for it. But that is interesting that if that is exactly how it played out.
Yeah, I mean, that's pretty incredible. He bet on himself, as he should, and it all paid off. He got to be on the biggest, most popular team, 2 weeks into his pro career, and then won a championship 2 months later. Not only a championship, the championship, and was Champs MVP along with it. So congratulations to Mercury. Congratulations to OpTic. The grand finals went 5-3 in favor of OpTic. And like I said at the top of the show, I think obviously like this is not like breaking news or anything, but the reason that OpTic was able to beat Vancouver, who kind of did return to form or somewhere close to it at this event, which is also a credit to their team and their coaching staff that they were able to turn it around after such a disappointing end to the regular season. But the reason that OpTic won is because they were able to edge out these hardpoint wins, especially Vault Hardpoint, which was map 4 of the series. They won 250 to 230. Vancouver coming in had won 9 straight Vault hard points. Dashy drops 43, and OpTic wins by 20, and that gives them a 3-1 lead in the series. Vancouver's able to tie it up with a round 11 in Protocol S&D, and then a round 5 Hacienda Control, and then OpTic shuts it out with a very dominant Hacienda S&D, and then a rewind hardpoint 250 to 215 win. It's just I'm kind of like speechless when I talk about this team because they could not win series to save their lives at in Major 2 or Major 3 qualifiers. I think you put it in the notes that they went 0-18 in the at some point went 0-18 in the Major 2 qualifiers, and then this time at Champs they go 14-3 map count, which I looked at all of the Champs winners dating back to Frico Impact in 2013. Only one team has ever had a better map count record at Champs, in the bracket at least, better than OpTic, and that was Complexity in 2014. Karma, of course, being on that team. Complexity went 15-3 in the bracket and won Champs that year. OpTic 14-3. Last year, OpTic went 14-5. I think the third best record at Champs was Atlanta FaZe in 2021, which was, I think, my second guess. It was like I figured it was going to be between Complexity and Atlanta FaZe. Atlanta went 11-3 in 21, so they had to win one fewer series or one less series than OpTic did, and Complexity did as well. So just a real big congratulations to OpTic. Anything in the grand finals that you want to discuss in particular?
I just want to go through my breakdown of what I was thinking in the grand finals as it was happening. I mean, obviously, we already laid it out, but OpTic is 9-0 map count heading into this grand finals, and kind of as you said, they beat FaZe. Who was the second series against? Why am I right? Oh, Toronto. FaZe, Toronto, and Boston 3-0. They win the first map of the grand finals here, and it's a hard point. And I think that's, kind of just in totality. My viewpoint on the series is, like from a mode-based breakdown, it was kind of not exactly what I would have anticipated with these two teams. Mm-hmm. But especially after that first map, OpTic takes the hard point. I'm sitting here like, OpTic's 10-0 map count at Champs. Can they just do the unthinkable and win this whole thing without dropping a map? That would have been crazy. But then we get the 6-0 in the search following that. And again, me thinking of this series in real time, I'm like, and the longtime Ego Chall fans know how much I think about S&D, and S&D wins championships. I'm like, all right, there's 4 S&Ds in a best of 9, and this is a 6-0. It's not like this was a 6-3 or 6-4. Like this was a stomp in the S&D. So I'm starting to think like, okay, Vancouver, they win one hard point or one respawn and take the 4 S&Ds. That's their road to victory here. And I was like, again, thinking of Vancouver historically this year as a strong hardpoint team. I would not have really thought about them being like, yeah, let's go out and pull off some Neslos and win the searches to win champs. So that's what I was kind of surprised. And then really, in multiple points after those first 2 maps, every map was extremely close, except maybe the Hacienda search. But the protocol control map 3, like it was a 3v5, I believe, for OpTic, and they won the round 3v5 in round 4 on offense that they win to force overtime, and then they win the round 5. They go to that vault hardpoint, like you said, where Vancouver's won 9 straight, and Dashy just goes off, and they win by 20. But then at that point, 3-1 series heading into a search, and I'm like, what's going to happen here? Like OpTic takes this, it's basically over. OpTic goes up 5-3 in the search, and Vancouver pulls off that comeback to take it around 11. I'm going back to what I was thinking a couple maps earlier, like, okay, Vancouver's kind of got a lifeline here, and they've won both searches. So if this goes the distance, that is scary for OpTic. And they follow that up with the Hacienda control, and I'm thinking, boom, that's your one respawn win here. You just have to win the 2 searches, and you're winning COD champs. And then it gets to that Hacienda search, and I went to I love obviously CDL Intel. I think Justin Pistachio is doing the tweets now in conjunction with Chrome, but they do like the graphic of the series, and they show the map records for each.
I was about to bring this up too.
I pull that up, and I see that Vancouver's 0-4 on Hacienda Search and Destroy. Now I'm like, oh no, like this is. I mean, obviously it's small sample size. It is champs, so like you can really throw the records out the window. But I'm just like, there's no way OpTic is just gonna give Vancouver their first win on a map in the champs grand finals. And OpTic showed up, slammed the door in probably, like I said, the 3rd least competitive map of the series outside of the first 2 maps. And then they, OpTic won another hard point, which they went 3-0 in hard point in the grand finals against Vancouver, a team known for their hard point since Neptune was added to the team. So that was really the takeaway for me. The S&D looking like it was favored for Vancouver till it wasn't, and then just really the hard point, like that the OpTic teams of the past that we've talked about being good in respawn, this goes against that whole my favorite adage of S&D wins championships. In this case, it was hard points win championships in the grand finals when you win all 3. But the team obviously they lost 3 maps all weekend, and that actually means they didn't lose a hard point all weekend, right? Because there are only 3 maps were in the grand finals, and it's 2 S&Ds in control.
Yeah.
So that's you laid out the numbers there for those other grand finals teams. It would be interesting if we go back. We're not going to be able to now, but I would bet that probably, well, the Cold team didn't lose a hard point in Ghosts, so yeah. I guess this isn't the first team to not lose a hard point, but maybe the Cold War FaZe team, maybe they didn't drop a hard point. I'm not sure either, but that's pretty impressive in itself too. So really, that was my in live time thinking breakdown of the grand finals from like a map by map basis. As I was really impressed. We'll get into Vancouver more. Impressed with Vancouver being able to show the resilience, take the S&Ds, especially going from winning a 6-0 S&D to making a comeback and taking a round 11 S&D. Like those are the 2 complete opposite ends of the spectrum for a S&D victory. But yeah, I mean, end of the day, like this was, I think. It's obviously it's a little different because it's a best of 9 and Major 1 finals was a best of 7. Um, but I think, especially due to the storylines and everything attached to this series, if you wanted to make an argument that this was the best grand finals of the year, I wouldn't hold it against you. I think in my mind, I would still lean towards Major 1 just because, me, the S&D guy, ending in a Game 7 round 11 like that, that's just that takes it to another level, but it's not, a huge difference. Those are two incredible grand finals, and this at the end of the day was a fantastic final. Um, Really, like, especially the way it started before the S&D and just OpTic's dominance. Like, I was worried it was going to be like an hour-long series, and OpTic were in a 5-0, but luckily that's not how it turned out, and we did get some very entertaining maps.
I was kind of the inverse of you because you were looking at the maps and modes from Intel. You were looking at them like in real time, like looking at Hacienda search and being like, all right, like this is maybe not going to go so well. I did that at the beginning of the series. I looked at this graphic when Crone or Pistachio he put it out, and I was like, just thinking like it would make sense for Vancouver to go up 3-1 in this series and then OpTic slowly start to roll it together because, Protocol Search was kind of the big toss up, I would say, because they had very, very similar records on that map, but otherwise OpTic had a pretty clear advantage in Hacienda Control. Hacienda Search, like you said, Vancouver hadn't even won it. They were tied, same map count, and Rewind Hardpoint and Rewind Search, which would have been the final map of the series. OpTic had a better map count in that. So I kind of looked at it like, okay, maybe Vancouver gets ahead and then OpTic fights back and somehow wins this. It's obviously the exact opposite of that because OpTic wins 3 of the first 4 maps when they hadn't, had an advantage in any of those maps except Dealership Search, which they lost. So all of those maps that they did have the advantage, or Vancouver did have the advantage, they lost. So I just think it's just stupefying, to be honest, that it went the way it did. Vancouver, I can't remember off the top of my head, of course, what the map count was, but we talked about the difference between Vancouver before Neptune and Vancouver after.
Yeah.
Even with accounting for the Major 4 qualifiers and Major 4 performance, they were still one of the best hardpoint teams in the entire CDL from Major 2 qualifiers on. OpTic has been up and down. Even with Mercury's in the lineup, it wasn't some consistent juggernaut force. They were definitely a lot better. It seemed like their ceiling was a lot higher than at any other point in the season, but it did not seem like it wasn't a guarantee, I would say, that Mercury's and OpTic were just going to roll through the tournament the way that they did. I mean, it's not like they rolled through Vancouver, but I don't think either one of us would be too surprised if that had happened, just considering what we saw from Vancouver at Major 4. Of course, they even lose in this tournament as well. So it was very realistic to think that OpTic would steamroll them, considering how most of this tournament had went. I'm very, very glad that it didn't happen. It does suck for Vancouver and their fans that they went to 3 grand finals this season, the most of any team, and they're the only one this season that did not come up with a victory, which is very, very unfortunate. But the bright side is that Vancouver was not expected to be in this position to begin with at any point before sometime during the Major 2 qualifiers, maybe even Major 2, because I know it did take us a while to really be convinced that Neptune and the Surge were real deals, but it turns out that they very much were. 3 grand finals. They are very competitive in this one. Didn't end up winning it, but that's the way it goes, and hopefully they're able to kind of roll it back next season. I did also see that before Champs Grand Finals, if Rambo had been able to win this Champs, he would have been the first coach in CDL history to also win 2 championships, having done that with the Dallas Empire in the first CDL Champs Grand Finals. I wanted real quick to hop over to a question that Matt asked a few times in the chat. He said, do you guys think FaZe changes? And I know we'll talk about Vancouver more in just a minute, but I do think we should at least try to talk about FaZe and wrap in LAT as well, because these were the 2 teams that we were pretty much convinced were going to at least get into the top 4. depending on how things work out, the bracket and everything, you could be convinced that, okay, one of them will not be in the Champs Grand Finals. Maybe neither of them do if one of them loses in loser finals. It doesn't even get close to that at Champs this year. LAT immediately upset by Boston. We mentioned it multiple times how Boston were able to upset LAT in round 1 of Major 2. I think LAT ended up finishing top 8 or top 6 or something like that at that event. Atlanta FaZe, of course, got upset very early in Major 3. I think they lost to Vancouver, if I'm not mistaken, in round 1 of that tournament. And then if I'm not mistaken, they lost to Miami. I think that was a top 6 or top 8 performance as well for them. This is just a confluence of events. Like, for one thing to happen, okay, that you could see that. For both of these things to happen, it just feels like we're living in like the only world that Doctor Strange could have possibly predicted or something. It feels like this could not have been foreseen. Atlanta loses 3-0 to OpTic, like we mentioned. LAT loses 3-2 to Boston, the 8th seed. I wouldn't say the worst team at Champs like coming in because Carolina existed, but they were not like world beaters by any means, even with some of the big wins that they had on their resume so far this season. And both of those things happen. You instantly know that these two teams are in real big trouble. If they're able to get to the end, they're going to have to fight through the losers bracket, which is not easy at all. They both had trouble in doing that this season when they did dip into the losers bracket, which was not very often considering they each went to 3 grand finals of the majors. But ultimately, it does not work out for either of them. LAT lose in losers round 1. They get double first rounded in this tournament. They lose to the Vancouver Surge 3-0. So they go 2-6 in map count. The team that I predicted to win Champs. I think you said your brain said LAT, your heart said Atlanta FaZe. I think you're having full body failure at this point because LAT lose in round 1. FaZe get knocked to the losers bracket by OpTic. They beat Carolina as expected, and then they get 3-0'd by the Miami Heretics in round 2 for a top 6 finish. Back-to-back top 6 finishes for Atlanta FaZe at Champs. What do you think went wrong for these two teams? And to answer Matt's question from the chat, do you see either of these teams or both of these teams changing their roster this offseason as a result?
Well, I think the immediate answer to that question is I don't think either of these teams make changes before the Esports World Cup. I would be completely mind blown if they did. And I think a large part of that would have to do with contracts and stuff, assuming that contracts, end at the actual end of the season. And since EWC is like a partnered event now and whatever, I would assume contracts run through that event date. So I would be very surprised if either team made a change before Esports World Cup. But now this is consecutive years for FaZe. With this roster, they've gotten top 6 at Champs, and we had these same conversations last year, and then FaZe won Esports World Cup, and those conversations went away, and they ran back the same roster. So Esports World Cup could have a big impact on these teams. I do think, regardless of placings, that LAT is most likely going to stick. That's just based on the comments that I saw from like Nadeshot and stuff over the course of the season. I think it was like something after Major 3. And they were talking about like kind of like playfully talking with Scrap and Nadeshot about like getting a raise or something. And Nadeshot's like, I'm paying you, or you're getting paid to do what you're supposed to be doing for the next 2 years or something like that. So like it seemed like, contract wise, this LAT team is under contract for this season and next season. I do think FaZe is a bit of an interesting one though, because this, again, it's back-to-back top 6s at Champs, back-to-back years where this conversation has popped up, and barring them coming out and winning EWC, I think that conversation is a realistic one to at least mention heading into the offseason. And I think, again, as we always say when we're talking about roster mania stuff, like one very large or unanticipated domino falls, and that changes everything. I don't know how to TXT easy in chat says simp to LAT for Envoy. While I don't see that happening, let's just use that as an example where Simp decides to explore his options or something. That's a massive domino, and that could cause LAT to consider making a change where they previously wouldn't have. So I'm not going to sit here and say that I don't think either change. I think there's a 0% chance that both teams make a change or won't change. I do think it will depend on how they perform at the Esports World Cup, and that will be have a big impact on what the teams do. But it is interesting that, especially from the FaZe side of things, like back-to-back years of coming up short at champs, it's a bit perplexing. And I do think at the same time it's very weird that LAT fell flat like this after how dominant they looked at the two previous events at Major 3 and Major 4. So I don't really know what to say in regards to why that happened. I do think, wow, I really struggled there. An uneducated assumption would be that it's possible that these teams like LAT and FaZe, just like over this break between Major 4 and Champs, maybe they didn't put in as much work as they previously would have. Maybe they did get a little complacent. That's always a conversation with teams after they win and then they can go into a little bit of a slump. I would be surprised with the players on these teams if that's actually what happened. But end of the day, like they didn't show up at champ, so it's fair criticism and it's fair to at least question it until we hear from the players themselves what they think went wrong or what they did in preparation for this event. I did see a tweet. I can't remember if it was Brian Stats or somebody else on Twitter, but I believe Simp had the lowest KD of any event in his career at this event, which, I mean, you're not going to put all the blame on Simp, but this is a guy who, in many people's eyes, is considered one of the greatest Call of Duty players of all time. And if he's struggling statistically, again, as we always say, stats aren't everything, KD isn't everything, but if your go-to guy is struggling a little bit, then it makes a little more sense why the team didn't meet expectations. So very, very weird tournament in the terms of, like you said, usually you have these conversations and one of these teams falls a little flat and then the other teams are, at the top still succeeding. But this is one where literally the 1 and 2 seeds for the tournament, 1 seed gets last place, the 2nd seed gets top 6. Like I can't remember too many times, obviously small sample size, but I can't remember too many times where that's happened, where literally again it's different this year because those were the only 2 teams that won tournaments heading into champs. But to think about that heading into even yesterday's action, like the 2 teams that won tournaments were already out of contention for champs very early and much earlier than anticipated. It's definitely a bit of a head scratcher.
So last year, post EWC, only 3 teams stayed the same: OpTic, Atlanta, and Boston. Boston was they completely changed their roster, only keeping Snoopy between not making champs, so the end of the regular season and EWC. So they came into EWC with pretty much a brand new roster. Obviously, OpTic had just won champs, so they were not going to change. Atlanta was the only other team that did not change their roster from champs, and they kept it all season long. So 3 out of the 12 teams stayed the same post EWC last year. That would mean it is increasingly likely that FaZe will make that change. And I should also mention that that was year one of this Atlanta FaZe roster with Draza as that fourth player, because it has been throughout the CDL era, considering there were 5 players to begin the CDL,
Yeah.
but the 3 players, Abizi, Simp, and Celium, those 3 have been with FaZe this entire time since 2020. I think it's going to be a conversation. I don't know if it's actually going to happen, but it would be foolish to think, in my opinion, that there shouldn't at least be a conversation of like, is it time to kind of move on from one of these 3? It would be stupid to say all 3 of these guys worthless, get out of here, because Simp and Celium were on the first team All-Star this year. They've each won season MVPs. Even Abizi, he was up for the season MVP during the Cold War season, like we talked about. So, these are 3 of the most talented players in Call of Duty history. If you want to say top 10, top 15, top 20, whatever, they're in the list, I think, pretty much indisputably. At the same point, though, this is back-to-back years where at the biggest event of the season, they come up short. And not just come up short as, they finish second or third. They're not even close to getting to a championship. They finished top 6 both years. And before that, it was Atlanta is slotted into the top 3, basically. No matter what, they will be there near the end of the tournament. In 2020, the first CDL champs, they get to the grand finals, they lose. 21, they steamroll their way through, they win champs. 22, I believe they lost in the grand finals, if I'm not mistaken. 23, I'm pretty sure they got third at that event. And then 24 and 25, they get top 6. So you have to look at it maybe as a trend, even with the different rosters that they've gone through. And I should mention that after 22, when they had Arcides, they replaced him, even after finishing second at Champs. And I believe they went to 2 or 3 grand finals during that season. They silver surfed basically all season long. They finished the regular season atop the standings. And yet they make that roster change. They bring in Slasher to replace Aristides. Same thing kind of happens after the 23 season. They do win an event that year. I believe it's just one. They get third at Champs, and then they replace Slasher at the end of the season with Draza. So I guess history would dictate that they would have actually made this change last year because they didn't perform well at Champs. That doesn't happen. They believe that, probably rightfully so, that this needed another year. Maybe EWC, like you mentioned, maybe that kind of saved this team, or maybe gave them some kind of inspiration or confidence that they'd be able to come back for 2025 and win Champs. They win 2 events. They go to 3 grand finals. This is the only season in CDL history they did not finish atop the season standings, which I think is notable now. It probably wouldn't be notable if they had won Champs, but they didn't finish atop the standings, and then they get top 6. Simp not playing well isn't great. I think it happens. Like, he is far from an issue on this team. He is like one of the best players in Call of Duty history. He is currently one of the best players in Call of Duty. He was, I forget what the MVP voting said. Did he end up finishing second in voting?
I don't think they did.
They didn't release it for that?
I don't think they just did it for the All-Star teams that I saw. Because
Okay.
I looked on their post for Rookie of the Year and MVP, and I didn't see it unless they posted it after the fact.
Okay. So regardless, though, we both agreed that Simp was probably the second MVP vote getter, or we thought he'd finish second, maybe third or something like that.
We said 3 and 4. We were scrapped Celium for MVP.
But he was both in the
Hydra.
top 4 for us, and we believed at worst he would be 5th. That shows he shouldn't be replaced. Celium, I think we both agree it'd be ridiculous to replace Cell. There's nobody that you could get that is actually better than him. Like maybe Scrap, like maybe he's that guy, but this event obviously would not dictate that Scrap is the guy that is going to replace him and get you a better Champs placing, because they got a worse Champs placing. Then it comes down to Abizi and Draza, which I think was always going to be the case. If you told me when Draza joined the roster, hey, in 2 years they're going to make a roster change, I'm like, all right, which of Abizi and Draza is going? Like, it's going to be one of those two. If they do make a change, I personally believe they will make a change, just because, one top 6 finish at champs is all right. Like, it's not ideal or anything, but for it to happen back-to-back years, they were not inconsistent, but there were some stretches where it did not make sense why they were losing certain matches. We talked about that. They had really slow starts to the major qualifiers until Major 4, and then they kind of tailed off toward the end of Major 4. So I just don't see this team sticking, all 4 of them. I did want to bring up one thing, though, because Ben, who was formerly part of FaZe, he obviously has some really good connections, some long-term connections with the team and the organization. He tweeted yesterday, he said, if y'all want Atlanta FaZe to make a coaching change after EWC, it's not going to fix their issues. It's on the players to step up. If anything, it's going to end their window, as they will lose their recruiting edge on the other legacy orgs when their players dip to follow the staff. A reply said, they've all been together so long, sometimes you just got to shake things up. Ben responded, said, if you want to talk player changes, sure. I just think dropping their coaches is going to eventually push all their talent out the door. And I think that was a great point. I never really thought about it, but Crowder has been with them this entire time. Like, we talk about like the threesome of Cell, Abizi, and Simp. Crowder has been there since the beginning with them. And so is RJ. RJ has been the assistant coach for a long time with Crowder, long time with FaZe. Those guys, it's the 5 of them, basically. If one of those 5 changes, it's going to change the dynamics, of course. And I think that's going to be a big change for them. And, obviously, I don't think Crowder is going to have any difficulty finding another team interested in his services if Atlanta were to move on from him. But I think it's interesting that Ben brought it up, of kind of saying, like, if you get rid of Crowder, then whoever picks up Crowder might just so happen to get some of those players on the back end as well, which I find interesting. I don't know if there's any other coach-player relationship that is like that in the CDL, because OpTic has changed coaches, LAT has changed coaches, NYSL had, I think, they had different coaches throughout their tenure as well. And obviously Cloud9 is a kind of a weird case this year. There just isn't another team right now. I guess if Miami, they're kind of all Spanish group, if they were to break up and one of them were to get signed to Vancouver, just for an example, maybe that would bring some of those players to Vancouver as a result. But this is just kind of a unique relationship. And I just thought it was interesting that Ben brought this up, and probably would have better insight on this, better insight than most people in the community.
Yeah, no, if you didn't bring it up, I was gonna, because I saw it, and obviously I think very highly of Crowder / replays / whatever alias you guys in the community know him as. I obviously, with Carmel winning back-to-back rings as a coach, you can you can make your personal cases for who you think the best coach in Call of Duty history is. But I think if you don't have Crowder as the number 1 coach, he's at least top 2, top 3, top 5 at worst. So I do think, like, if Atlanta decided to make that change in the coaching staff, I think it would have ramifications and would potentially sway some of the players to, if Crowder goes to, let's just say, Gentlemates for lack of a better team, because we know Gentlemates coaches just recently announced that they're being allowed to explore their options. If Crowder goes there, that does pull, maybe they're like, okay, we can, at least entertain recruiting the Tiny Terrors or Celium, or at least one of these FaZe guys. And the FaZe guys might be a little more inclined to at least consider the offer, as opposed to going to another team with a coach they aren't familiar with at all. I did put in the YouTube chat, I think, right now, I was trying to think of it like in terms of realistic options for FaZe if they were to stick with like the core 3 and try to replace Straza. Really, the first name that came to mind to me was Sib, as someone who is a quote-unquote realistic option, because I'm not counting like OpTic guys or LAT guys, not really considering non-NA players, just due to, the dynamic we've seen for this team. That obviously could be something that they could entertain, but Sid did have, I think he was a substitute when he first, Atlanta FaZe was first a thing in one of the 5v5 years. And, he does have a bit of a connection there. But I don't know if Sib is actually a quote unquote upgrade over Draza, who again, Draza is a pretty good player. He was an all-star this year. Sib's been an all-star before, but Sib is more of a, Sib more aligns with Celium in terms of like a guy who is just getting a ton of kills. So I don't know how that dynamic would work, but like really that's what I'm like, whatever you think of, whether Sib over Draza or Draza over Sib, like that just goes to, in my mind, there aren't a ton of readily available options for FaZe if they were to make a 1-for-1 change. And that's what makes me think that this could be the offseason where they consider doing something more. Or, end of the day, they win EWC, they don't make a change, and we're back to square one. So I think it's going to be take some time. The other element to all of this, which we mentioned a while ago, there's the rumblings. I don't even really think it's enough to say rumors, just like the murmurs or the rumblings of potential new Saudi teams entering the CDL or showing interest in entering the CDL. If a new Saudi org comes in offering a boatload of money to some of these FaZe guys, that could be that quote unquote domino that tips the scales and gets roster mania really rolling. And then we see some massive changes. So multiple variables to all this in terms of off-season stuff, but we got plenty of time to talk that over the coming months.
Yeah, I was just trying to think of like the biggest thing with even in traditional sports when there's the argument of like you should fire this coach. My first counter argument is for who? Like who is going to replace, like I'm an Ohio State football fan. So Ryan Day has been talked about as the guy that should be fired for 2 to 3 years now. And my argument has always been, okay, who do you hire to replace him? It's not just you don't just do it. You have to have some kind of plan of who is going to replace him, who is going to be an upgrade, like you mentioned, who's going to be an upgrade over Draza, who is going to be an upgrade over Abizi. I think that's really, really hard to come up with an answer. Abizi plays a pretty rare style of, he's really, really fast. I think he slowed down a little bit, like just in general, because I think there are other players now that have learned from this of like, I'm going to do that too. I'm going to wreak as much havoc as possible on the map and make other players so uncomfortable in that. So I think other players have learned from that. I just don't know who could you possibly replace Abizi with? Like the first name that comes to mind is Joe Deceives, because Joe has, like you mentioned when I believe it was Insight, maybe it was Kleenex, where they said like, I actually have to speed up to play with him because he is so ridiculously fast. Obviously he had a breakout performance this season and he was, when we were coming up with like comeback or most improved player, he was at the top of mind because he had such a great season. I don't know if that's even an improvement, and that's no disrespect to Joe, but it's a lot of pressure to play for Atlanta FaZe, to be surrounded by Celium and Simp, who have their ways of playing. Like they are very comfortable, in my opinion, playing the way that they have played and gotten so much success in doing so. I'm just not sure exactly where they go from here. And there's really like, if you're looking at their game modes, like they won like 64% of their hard points, 66% of their S&Ds, 68% of their controls. This was a team all season long on paper and in reality that should have been in the Champs Grand Finals or close to it. It's just this one bad event really has this cascading effect where now you do have to consider maybe we have to make a change. Maybe it isn't what we thought it was, and it's time to shift focus away from the trio that we've gotten used to over the years.
I will say the only thing there in terms of Abizi and Joe Deceives is I could be wrong in this, but I don't think I am. I'm pretty sure Abizi is like one of the original guys who was playing ranked play with Joe Deceives, and even if that's not the case, I'm pretty sure they are very close friends. Um, so that makes me believe that I could more likely see if Abizi were to go to another team, I would think it would be more likely to see an Abizi and Joe Deceives pairing than Joe Deceives replacing Abizi. But obviously, money talks, and if Joe Deceives gets an offer from FaZe to replace Abizi, I don't know if he's, really in a position to turn that down. So, a lot of interesting things, but I do think that it would be your very short list of people who could even in theory replace Abizi. We're talking Joe Deceives, Kleenex, Neptune,
Kleenex was the next
Real.
guy. I was like, he actually fits probably even better than Joe because he. So I'm looking at the list. He had the 5th most first bloods of anybody this season, only behind 04, Abizi, Real, and Shotzi. And then hard point engagements per 10 minutes, he was number 1 in the league. Abizi was 41st in the league, just ahead of Simp, just behind Beans. So maybe if you do really want to speed FaZe back up again, Kleenex is the guy. Like Joe Deceives is 9th on that list for perspective.
But at the end of the day, we're naming these names, and you still have to have that conversation of, are they actually upgrades to Abizi? And well, I think based on how long we're already talking about just these couple teams, I don't think we're going to talk about the awards too much tonight. Abizi was an all-star this year, which I think that was a little interesting. Not something that we both voted for, but it was very apparent in the voting that was shared by the CDL Twitter account that the players and coaches very highly just hold Abizi to a high regard, and that's not surprising based on what he's produced over the last few years and his entire career, really.
Before we move on, I just want to mention LAT because I know you discussed it a little bit, but I think they make a change. Like they're a team historically, like the organization does not stand pat. Like they are not one of the teams that is cool with, being patient really. They did it last year a little bit. Like they didn't go and like spend big or anything, but we saw after the season, they said, screw this. Like we're just going big. We're going to build the super team. And when the super team, granted, they performed up the standard this season. They finished first in the standings in the regular season, becoming the first team other than Atlanta FaZe to do so. They won 2 majors. They went to 3 major grand finals. They won the second minor as well. And yet they finished top 8 right along with the Carolina Royal Ravens. Like that's the kind of thing that I think, unless they win EWC, which that could change things. Like if it's kind of the same thing of what happened with Atlanta FaZe last year. If they win EWC, maybe LAT can be convinced that this is the roster to move forward with. But it just seems kind of hard to believe that a team with the season MVP in Scrap, Hydra, who is probably at worst the 4th best player in the league, for that team not to even win a match at Champs, and I just don't see them sticking together unless they have this really great, impactful run when they get to EWC. So I don't know who. I would imagine Envoy will be the player if they do make a change, because that as like he's just. It's just one of those teams where it feels like there's a solid top 2. There seems to be like a 3rd player that is decidedly 3rd, and then there's the 4th player that is decidedly 4th. And usually that 4th player, as has been the case with Atlanta FaZe over the years, that 4th player is usually one left out to dry at the end of the day. And I think that's probably Envoy in this case. Who with? How does that all work? We'll see what happens. I think we also have to remember that the Las Vegas Falcons might be looming and that they might be big spenders at the end of the day in free agency. We'll see what C9 does. That's another interesting wrinkle to this. There's a lot of kind of ifs, ands, and buts, but I think we'll circle back and talk more about these teams as the offseason continues, of course. Anything else before we kind of move on?
Yeah, I shout out Spubsy in the chat saying thieves aren't changing. They won a ton this year, had one bad event at the worst
Yeah.
time. That's really what I'm thinking right now. And even, you mentioned Envoy and stuff. Like it's worth mentioning that obviously Envoy won a world championship with these and then left Thieves, but that was clearly a,
End of an
you
era.
know, not even I'm that was like a shift in the business model
Yeah.
for the
Yeah.
100 Thieves brand. They went from being willing to pay to wanting to scale back a little bit, and then this year they're just like, screw it, we're going back all in full throttle. And Envoy, obviously this placing at champs isn't at all what they wanted, but Envoy is pretty legitimately like a Hall of Fame, or like in I can't remember if they call it the Hall of Fame, but the LAT Hall of Fame or 100 Thieves Hall of Fame that has
Oh yeah.
Octane, Someday for League of Legends, and I think Kenny might be in it too. Um, so with Envoy's added tournaments this year, I think it's inevitable that he like winds up there one day when it's all said and done for him. And that makes me think like I don't, even if you want to say like you argue Envoy could be the player that's replaced, or you see a realistic upgrade opportunity, I just don't know. And especially considering Scrap, who, shout out Scrap, one season MVP as we both predicted. Scrap wanted to continue playing with Envoy, and that was a part
Yeah.
of this whole like the off-season thing in the past, where were they going to go to LAT or were they going to go to General Mates? It was like uh Scrap and Envoy were like a package deal, and if your MVP player wants to play with someone like that, I don't know if they're going to even consider making a change there.
Yeah. Let's move on a little bit. I want to talk about Vancouver a little bit more, but then I really want to talk about my boys, my Boston Breach boys. Vancouver, just kind of briefly, we discussed them in the context of the grand finals, but it should be noted that they did have this kind of resurgence, for lack of a better term, no pun intended, but like they lose 3-1 in the first round of this tournament. It does seem like, considering what we saw at Major 4 qualifiers and at Major 4, that this was just kind of a continuation of the Vancouver that has kind of lingered for the last 5 weeks of the season. Then they sweep LAT, they sweep Toronto, which is huge. Those are the two of the top 3 seeds in the tournament. They eliminate them from champs. Then they beat the Miami Heretics, who sent them down to the losers bracket and who had just beaten Atlanta FaZe. They beat Boston in a game 5, and then of course they go to the grand finals. They lose 5-3 to OpTic. Overall, how do you view this season for Vancouver, considering the very low expectations we had for them to begin the season, the even lower expectations we had for them after Major 1, and really the pretty low expectations we had going into, or I guess murky would maybe the better word, going into champs, considering what we had seen from them at Major 4?
I mean, if you're Vancouver Surge fan, or involved in management or the organization in any facet, like you have to consider this season a major victory. Obviously, that is a little ironic because they weren't able to hoist trophies or get those major victories, but especially based on where things started, the fact that you made it to 3 grand finals, it has to mean something, because the alternative is you're a team that wasn't even contending for championships at all. And there were several teams that, couldn't even make it to 1 grand finals, let alone 2, let alone 3. So I think Vancouver is an interesting team heading into the offseason, because I don't know what direction they head in from a player standpoint. We talk about like the 1+1 contracts and stuff like that. Like it's possible they have Neptune like on a player option deal for next year, but like is Abuza an unrestricted free agent because he played 2 years for Vancouver? Even 04 could technically be an unrestricted, just because I don't know how that the first half of his contract would, if that counts as like the full year or whatnot. So it's possible they have Nasty and Neptune on lock, or at least like have a player option for them. And then they have to go from there. But that's getting a little bit ahead of what we're talking about right now. I just think, yeah, obviously the end results weren't there for Vancouver multiple times, but the fact that this squad with, four relatively young players still trying to prove themselves in the CDL, the fact they were able to make it to the grand finals and especially in this one, at least compete uh, and win some maps, I think that does speak volumes to the camp and the potential of all these guys individually. But in my eyes, it really does. The whole thing with them getting the back-to-back grand finals, then top 12, and now this placing here, that really does speak to me in terms of this unit's effectiveness together. And, that's kind of like, it's not a great comparison because obviously the OKC Thunder, who just won the NBA championship, had SGA, who won MVP. But for a lack of a better example off the top of my head, like there was that whole narrative around like, these young guys who haven't really had a ton of success at this highest level yet because they're so young and haven't been in the league for so long, coming together as a unit and succeeding. And then there were the jokes of like Caruso having to like show them how to pop champagne and stuff. That's kind of like what I'm thinking of with this Vancouver squad right now is like it's four guys who, haven't seen that success at the CDL level yet, but they're really close, and you can't deny that because 3 grand finals is almost as close as it can get without actually having a title to speak for it. So I'm especially heading into this event, wasn't sure what to expect from this Vancouver team. They lose in the first round to Miami and go to a match against Thieves, who we talked about them struggling head to head all season. And the fact they were able to start their run with a huge win over LAT was really like, eye opening to me. I was like, okay, here we go. This could be the start of something, because it would have been very easy for me to just to see like LAT stomping them and that being the end of Vancouver season, and they have a totally different conversation now. So yeah, I just think, I'm proud of these guys. I do think obviously, and they inevitably would have wanted to at least have one major championship. Obviously you could argue they may have won 3 for the 3 grand finals they were in, but end of the day, it's a really promising start to multiple careers, especially like Abuza in 04. Nasty's been around, but he's shown now he can compete with the top dogs, and even Neptune getting his chance at redemption to come back into the league, showing that he belongs. Happy for all those guys. And I even tweeted it before the grand finals yesterday, like the run that Vancouver went on here from losers bracket round 1 to the grand finals of champs was very reminiscent to me of Team Envy in Ghosts Champs 2014, which ironically was Rambo's team, the coach of this squad. And I was really pulling for that whole narrative of like Rambo getting a second shot to do this incredible losers bracket round 1 run to winning COD champs. But now it's just, it's another part of Rambo's legacy where he's able to do these loser bracket run, but just not get over the final hurdle to actually hoist the championship. So who knows, maybe they get another chance next year. I've over multiple episodes spoke very highly of Rambo. And I just think that this whole run for Vancouver, although it didn't get the end result those guys inevitably would have wanted, this was much more indicative of the Vancouver squad we saw not at Major 4, and is more of a testament to what they're capable of and their potential moving forward.
I was trying to come up with some kind of comparison or analogy from what we've seen throughout competitive COD history, but I don't remember a team getting to this many grand finals and not winning at least once, in this short of a time frame, at least, because this is 4 months or so, and they went to 3 grand finals, including champs, and They weren't able to win any of them. In 2 of them, they get swept. Maybe like Toronto Ultra or something. I don't know if they went to that many grand finals in that kind of crunch of a time. I was also trying to think of like going into next season or going into the off season, would a team like this make a change? And I think logically, if they can help it, they should not make a change. It should not be, if Vancouver can help it, they should bring all 4 of these players back. Rambo should be the coach, and then we can kind of move forward and just say, hey, this is the team we have. We're going to try to run it back. I thought about the Seattle Surge, actually, because they did win that one event. I believe it was Major 2 or Major 3, the first Pred Sib year. They obviously were very, very good that year. I think they got 3rd at Champs, if I'm not mistaken. Then they run it back, and it doesn't really work out in their favor that season, and it kind of backfires because they could have sold high, very high on Pred, and then they let them walk in the end of the year, and it didn't really result in any championships. It's I also thought about LAT last year. It's a different scenario because they started to trend upward toward the end of the season, and obviously peaking at EWC where they get a 2nd place finish. They ultimately changed that roster around completely because they know that they can get a super team in there and completely overhaul their championship potential. It obviously didn't work out in the end this season, but I like the idea now. Josh Kitching said, and AF both said, FaZe and Vanguard made 4 finals and they didn't win 1. So that's probably your parallel, right? Is Atlanta FaZe in Vanguard, where they silver surfed and then they even got 2nd at Champs. But that was also a team that had just won championship a year before and probably just felt a lot more confident in the entire team. And it did seem like RC was always going to be the odd man out in that roster too. I don't know if there's an odd man out on Vancouver right now. It doesn't seem like there's one player that can just be easily replaced. So I don't know. I think Vancouver should run it back. They should be probably one of the few teams to do so, but I just don't know if they're going to be able to keep them, right? There was a lot of love for Nasty this weekend. He was getting a lot of love on social media. Neptune has been getting, especially on this podcast, he's basically been our patron saint of the Ego Chall podcast. Abuza, maybe robbed Rookie of the Year, according to him and maybe a few other people last year. 04 is, pretty incredible, a really great story for him to be at this point, coming in when he did last year. I think they run it back. I think they should run it back, but off-season's kind of where weird things happen. The dominoes start rolling and tipping over, and Vancouver ends up making a roster change pretty realistically in a lot of these scenarios. So we'll see what happens with Vancouver. The Boston Breach, though, my boys, I never stopped believing. I definitely picked them in every single match this weekend. I didn't pick against them at all. This is probably one of the most shocking top 3 finishes, in Champs history, full stop. Maybe Team Revenge in AW, but that one was they just came out of nowhere. Boston, we've known them so long. This team has been together for a year now. Since EWC last year, we saw them through this entire season. We saw them able to upset better teams than them, but for them to beat LAT, beat the Miami Heretics, who probably we thought were the top 3, top 4 best teams in this game, and then nearly beat the Vancouver Surge in losers finals and get to Champs Grand Finals. I think I might have cried if Boston had gotten to Champs Grand Finals. I figured it wouldn't go super well for them against OpTic in a best of 9, but I think it's unbelievable that this happened for them. And they probably should stick to, I mean, they finished 8th in the regular season standings. You could never really consider them to be a good team, quote unquote, because they were always at best in the middle of the pack. But for them to do this, they did beat good teams. I don't know if there's a level that they can go. I think the ceiling, they're like kind of right at the ceiling right now. It's a relatively low ceiling for teams that typically finish third at champs. But what do you think happens with Boston? What did you think of their incredible run at champs this year?
I mean, for starters, we were almost at that, point that you mentioned just kind of offhand last episode of if Boston wins champs, we're having a 4-hour Ego Chall episode, and we're already approaching a 2-hour episode here, but it would have been pretty wild if Boston pulled it off, and I think there obviously are a lot of Greenwall fans who are happy with OpTic winning champs, but I don't know in comparison how close it would have been, but there would have been some Censor supporters who would have been going crazy on the timeline if Censor got a COD champs ring. I know he did the whole thing with like the national championship rings for like the old school games and whatnot. But if he got a ring here as the quote unquote shadow GM for Boston or whatever, that would have led to some funny stuff on the timeline too. But on a more serious note, I do think I'll get to that in a second. In terms of the future of Boston, but talking about Boston's performance at this tournament, Maven said it after their second series victory over Miami. They win the game 5 round 11 against Miami, and Maven calls them the Boston Neslos. And at that point, obviously it's only 2 series at champs. But they were 0-4 in hardpoint and 4-0 in search and 2-0 in control. So that was pretty much the craziest component of all of that to me for Boston was they get to the winners finals against OpTic and they lose 3-0. So they're 0-5 in hardpoint. They get to the losers final against Vancouver and they lose that first hardpoint to Vancouver. They're 0-6 in hardpoint at that point. They win the search to go to 4-1 in search, and then they flip the script with the last 2 maps. They win a hardpoint in map 4 to go 1-6 in hardpoint, forced to game 5, but then they lose their second search of the tournament to go 4-2 in search at champs. So really, it would have been one of the more incredible runs. Obviously, we've talked about impressive runs here by OpTic in the winners bracket and then Vancouver in the losers bracket. But to even get top 3 with potentially not winning any hard points, and in the end they win 1 hard point, that would have been a pretty wild storyline, especially if they get to the grand finals in a best of 9 and they win champs by not winning any hard points. Like that's going down in the history books for sure. So I think that was probably the most surprising thing for me with Boston's success at this tournament is the fact that it came through the searches. Like I wouldn't consider Boston one of the better search teams in the league, but that's just how it worked out. Was really surprised. Honestly, going back to their first series against LAT, we've talked about LAT and their success in control all year. So the fact Boston was able to win a control against Thieves and 2 searches, like that was maybe that should have been our first indicator that something's up with Thieves and they weren't firing on all cylinders and all that. But yeah, I mean, shout out to your Boston Breach boys, especially in that first series there against LAT. We saw the 8 seed take down the 1 seed once again. That was a narrative for our first couple events this year. And it pops up at champs again because, of course, why not? But beyond this, I'm not sure what the future holds for Boston. Again, it is important to remind everyone there were those conversations last offseason of Boston Breach potentially folding and moving on from competing or operating in esports. But then obviously as we stand right now, they stuck with it, kept the team together from EWC and played out this year. So it's possible Boston continues to compete in 2026. It's also possible, as the rumors and murmurings and whatever suggest, maybe another org swoops in and takes Boston's spot and makes an offer to them for their league spot that they can't refuse. And then that would potentially lead to make it more likely that player changes happen. So I think if the Boston Breach organization as it exists now, sticks in Call of Duty for next year, I wouldn't be surprised if this team stays together. Just because of that whole lack of certainty around how much they want to invest and yada yada. We've talked all about that for a while now, but that's another one. We'll probably get more clarity on the Boston situation as the offseason develops.
So I was looking at their stats. Obviously, you said they went 0-5 in hardpoint, which is pretty incredible to get.
1-6.
1-6, excuse me. They don't have the final series for them, so that's on Breaking Point. At least they haven't updated yet to reflect their Vancouver series. So we have 1-6, but this season, so they have to be the first or one of the first teams in CDL history to finish top 3 without having a winning record in any of the game modes, because hardpoint. So this is not obviously taking in their Game 5 loss to Vancouver in the losers finals, but they went 29-34 in hardpoint this season, 27-27 in search, and 16-22 in control. They had a losing match record, I believe, by 2 or 3 matches this season. And at CHAMPS, they had nobody finish with a positive KD, if I'm not mistaken. Because through the first 3 matches of the tournament, they had Cammy, who had a .82, Awakening .88, Snoopy .86, and Purge .97. And even during the counting for the entire season, only Snoopy had an above 1 KD. He had 1.02. Everybody else was 0.93 or lower. Of course, we say S&D does, or not S&D, KD doesn't really mean that much. It usually, when you have players that are dropping 0.9s consistently, that usually does matter in the end. It didn't really matter all that much to the Breach, at least in the final tournament. I just thought it was interesting. I think I even said on the preview show that if Boston was able to win champs, then Snoopy should be able to punch Slasher directly in the face, just as a freebie, just as not payback, but just another reward. We didn't get there, but we were getting a lot closer. This is the most surprising result. OpTic winning is surprising, right? This is ridiculous that they were able to do this.
It's 7-8, the 7 versus 8 seed in the winners finals of COD Champs.
Yeah. And they were they looked like the 7 and 8 seed for a good part of the season. Maybe not the end with OpTic, but these two teams were not very good for a large stretch of the year. And again, it just doesn't matter. It just adds to the story of everything that happened at Champs, and honestly makes it one of the most compelling CDL championships or COD Champs of all time. So I think that's a pretty cool moment. I don't want to make this necessarily a 2-hour podcast, so let's just briefly touch on some of these other teams. The Miami Heretics, they finish 4th at this event. They lose to the Boston Breach, like we said, in winners round 2. They lose Game 5 in that series. They lose Game 5 to the Vancouver Surge in loser semifinals to finish 4th. I think this is just overall a successful year. Miami,
Absolutely.
Miami was, I think it's not even a debate. They were among the top 4 best teams by the end of the year, because they're maybe tied for 4th or whatever, but they never got to a grand finals, but they beat LAT on LAN. They beat FaZe twice on LAN, if I'm not mistaken. I know they beat them. They eliminated them twice from LAN, which is pretty incredible. They beat them at Champs. They finished top 4 here. They had 2 other top 3 finishes during the season. I believe they finished 5th, just barely, in the standings in the regular season. By far an incredible year. I don't know where they necessarily go or if they do make a change, but Rancor looks like he's a real player. He made second team All-Star this
Yeah.
season. Real, we've sung his praises so much. Super was before Mercury's, he was the revelation of this season. And Meadows, he's the guy, he's a great player. He's probably the thing I was saying before, where there's usually an odd man out. He's probably the odd man out, but he's also the vet of the team. He's the guy that's been there for a long time with Heretics and been connected with the organization. And this is just a weird setup that they have, being an all Spanish team. If they're dedicated to that vision, they don't really have nearly as large of a player pool to select from. So I think that kind of changes some things, but I would not be surprised if they're another team that sticks throughout the offseason and they come back in Black Ops 7 with the exact same roster. What do you think?
Yeah, I think the biggest question mark for them is what happens to Real. And I think it's just because, again, contract wise, if he's on a 1+1 deal, he from last year to this year, he might technically be an unrestricted free agent. We don't know how serious it was, but there was at least the conversation of Real potentially going to OpTic. Was it Major 3 to replace?
Yes, it was Major 3.
Skies? I don't remember if it was before or after Skies. Regardless, we don't know how serious those conversations were or if they even happened, but the fact that it was at least mentioned, and it is worth, again, mentioning, Real started, he was going to play with Carolina last year before the whole visa situation happened. So of the players on Miami, not to say that Metals or Rancor or Super couldn't play for a non-Spanish team, Real seems like the most likely to potentially play for a non-Spanish team. And if his contract situation makes him an unrestricted free agent, based on the potential we've seen from him, he is a very enticing prospect that some of these other teams might be wanting to throw a bag at. But yeah, AF just said it. I really don't think the Real, Rancor, and Super trio is splitting. And I kind of agree. I think the formula for Miami these last 2 years has been they have the quote unquote next man up from the Spanish scene waiting in the wings. They got Rancor early this offseason, and they had Super as a substitute or whatever. Before this, it was Eric Boom, which obviously didn't pan out for him in the CDL, but Eric Boom and Real. So I could see this 4-man squad for Miami sticking, and maybe they identify another young up-and-coming Spanish player and they sign him as their quote-unquote 5th man and have him waiting in the wings. I think that's the most likely approach for Miami in the offseason, but we'll have to see. I do think Real is an enticing prospect if, the contract situation plays out and everything like that. But overall, yeah, very, very pleased with Miami's performance this year. I think most people in that camp have to be excited about how things played out for them, especially once Super was added to the squad on a full-time basis. And yeah, I think, I thought it was a really cool moment when Rancor was officially named Rookie of the Year. They had Super join him on stage and they kind of held the trophy together. And I think that kind of, that speaks to the camaraderie that they're, makes it very unlikely to see that duo splitting up. And obviously, since they're both on their rookie contracts, it is unlikely from a contract basis, let alone the chemistry and, all that speaking. So, yeah, I think the future looks bright for this Miami team. I think you mentioned top 4 team or whatever on the year. I think at worst you put him 5th over
worst.
At worst 5th with LAT, FaZe, OpTic, and Vancouver ahead of them. And I would say Vancouver ahead of them just because, again, Vancouver made it to 3 grand finals. And that's the next step I would want to see from this Miami team. They had some good placings this year, but they didn't obviously get to a finals. So I think that's got to be like where you set the bar if this squad sticks together for 2026.
And you might have mentioned it, but I should also just say it to reiterate it. Nonetheless, they were round 11s away from 2 more wins. Like they lost both of their matches in round 11 game 5s. Like that just happens. Like that's really unlucky. That's a horrible break to have. I don't think they would have beaten OpTic in winners finals. I don't think they might have beaten Boston in losers finals, but again, I think they probably lose to OpTic in the grand finals. But still, I think they have a lot of reasons to believe that this is a team that still has some growing to do and still can get much better. That trio is about as good as a trio can get when you're not spending as much money as you would to have like Simpabizi and Celium or formerly like Shotzi Predashi, like that kind of trio. So they one last thing is like they might have a smaller player pool to pick from because they seem to be set on the Spanish players, but that also gives them a lot of control over that market in general. Like they have the entire pool of Spanish players to pick from, where all the other teams are essentially competing against each other for rising challengers players or like former CDL players or like the current CDL players. They don't seem to be playing in the same pool as everyone else, which could give them an advantage if they're able to identify someone like Real or Rincourt or Super, which is a pretty incredible, like, granted Real was not initially with the Heretics, but it wasn't like when he was with Carolina, he was identified as like the superstar that, or like the star that he's really come and blossom into be. So I think that's very interesting. I look forward to seeing what Miami can do next year. One last team, I think, because I don't really know how much you actually have to say about Carolina in all of this, but Toronto, I think, is the most interesting team in terms of the roster going into the offseason because I'm almost certain they will change this year. They were pretty close to completely overhauling it last offseason. They, if I'm not mistaken, Insight and Kleenex might have been restricted free agents or maybe
That's
just one or the other.
Year.
And they and Joe, and I think to a lesser extent Beans, but like most of this roster is going to be of interest to other teams in the league. I don't think there's going to be a shortage of interest for Joe, Kleenex, and Insight. We just mentioned Kleenex as like a potential Abizi substitute if FaZe really wanted to do that. Insight is obviously super talented. Joe, we've talked about it on this episode. His play style, his aggression, the way that he performed all year long could be really an enticing addition for pretty much any of the non-OpTic. Really, like maybe the top 2 or 3 teams might not pick him up, but even then, it's not a stretch to believe that they want to get faster, they want to get more aggressive, and he would be someone to do that. So where do you think Toronto goes from here after a top 6 placing at Champs?
Yeah, the business model, or at least everything we've heard from the outside looking in for Toronto over these last few off seasons, they've let their guys explore their options in the off season. So I wouldn't be surprised if all of them were announced they're restricted free agents. At the same time, I would be a little surprised if Toronto let Joe Deceives just walk for free based on his performance this year. Again, he did get named an all-star, so shout out Joe Deceives. But yeah, I just think, I feel like we've kind of talked about some of these duos and trios that have stuck together for a while now, potentially considering making moves. I think the Toronto duo of Insight and Kleenex, if I have to pick one right now that is most likely to split up, I think this might be the year that Kleenex and Insight, decide to go their separate ways or make a decision that, one goes to another team and one stays potentially. End of the day, though, that they've come back and teamed together over these last few years, so anything's possible, and it could, work out in their favor that, the way the offseason rolls, they just decide to stick with Toronto and run it back again. But I do think it is possible that we see a change in that regard. I think it is definitely spot on though. Toronto, maybe one of their least successful years in the CDL. Just again, they didn't have a trophy this year, and their best placing came with Mercury's on the squad, and then they let him go. So, um, yeah, I think if I was in Toronto's position, and especially with everything that happened with Mercury's, like if I see Joe DeCeves, I'm trying to lock him on the squad if I can, unless there's just some massive buyout offer that you can't pass up. But then beyond that, I'm looking to make moves and see what I can create for the future. And I think highly of Toby Kleenex. I'd love. I think a lot of Toronto fans would love for him and Insight to stick around, but I do think it might be time for them to consider moving on from at least one of them and splitting up that duo.
And then we'll just briefly speak on Carolina. It's
What do you want to speak about?
Didn't work. The
Nope.
Vivid actually wins Challengers finals, and Carolina doesn't win a match at Champs. Not to say that Vivid would have, turned the tide necessarily, but I mean, with hindsight, hindsight being 2020 and all that, it was a horrible change because they were a relatively competitive team, definitely good against the bottom 6 or 7 teams in the league, horrible against the top 3 or 4. Then they just became horrible against the all 11 teams that they had to play. They, I think, won 1 or 2 matches with Rex in the lineup. So they won 1 match, I believe. So they win against Boston, coincidentally, 3-0 on May 3rd. Other than that, they lose to LAT twice, Minnesota, Toronto, OpTic, Minnesota, Miami, Toronto twice, and then Atlanta FaZe. Granted, playing Atlanta FaZe in losers round 1 of Champs is just the bad break, but it's Champs. Like they're pretty, 8 competitive teams. I guess 7 because Carolina wasn't competitive, but Gwyn, 1.17 KD at this event. He's got to be absolutely sick that they won 1 map in this tournament.
Nah. I think that's like, again, okay, from that perspective, yeah, he's got to be upset with the team performance, but with everything that happened this year individually for Gwyn, the whole Gwinternet thing not showing up on LAN, the best thing possible for him was for him to show out like he did at Champs. And yeah, he, team-wise didn't get the team success, but individually he played pretty well in the small sample size at Champs in what we think, again, based on what we know about contracts and stuff, is likely, his entering free agency. That is like the best possible outcome for him individually. Again, didn't have the team success, but he showed up at Champs, was doing what, people have been asking to see from Gwyn on LAN with that whole Gwinternet thing. And so, yeah, I think that's the one positive for Carolina, heading into EWC and this offseason is they just have to figure out what they want to do with Gwyn. And I think it would be very, again, similar to like Joe DeCeves with Toronto. Like I feel like Carolina should want to lock him up and build around Gwyn. But if Carolina, I mean, who knows if Carolina even exists as an organization, because maybe they get an offer from another org. But aside from that, if Carolina gets an offer for Gwyn they just can't pass up, then sure, maybe you let him go then. But outside of that, I think Gwyn has proved himself, especially on the biggest stage here, showed he can do it on LAN, and I think you build around him, and then the rest of the team, you just figure it out from there. But that's, again, I think we kind of had a similar thought process for Carolina heading into this past season. That was a little different though, because obviously last year was Gwyn's first year, so we thought of like, the 1+1 deal. It wasn't going to be as big of a deal because they can just extend him for the 1 additional year. Now, if that was the case and he is a free agent, it gets a little murky because some of these other teams could see how Gwynn played individually, and they might want to, take a stab at signing him. And then from Gwynn's perspective, like, rookie of the year, playing well individually, but hasn't seen that, team success yet. Does he stick with like quote unquote comfortability from like an organization he knows, or does he take a chance with another team and another set of players to try and turn things around from like a non-individual perspective? So definitely interesting. I think that's the very start of conversations for Carolina in the offseason, and everything after Carolina answers the question of are we keeping Gwynn or is he moving on, then that can start the full offseason proceedings for them.
Yeah, I think, Carolina seems so precarious in terms of like, we've talked about like their financial issues with like the top organization and stuff in the past. If I'm him, like, and I have some other options, like I'm definitely exploring those more seriously than maybe some other team or other players would on other teams. I think C9 could be interesting. They're probably going to just build from scratch with their roster. Minnesota might do something similar. I don't know exactly how it works out. I don't think he's going to end up on LAT, OpTic FaZe or anything, but I think the other teams, probably not Miami either, but the other teams seem more realistic, and I don't think he's going to have a shortage of suitors this summer.
Maybe we get a Gwynn Abuza duo, because Abuza, we didn't talk about it I think I kind of mentioned it, but Abuza 2 years on Vancouver, maybe, the whole Gentlemates thing with, he's Belgium, but, a European squad, if Gentlemates goes down that route. Would be funny if Gwynn and Abuza teamed up after the Rookie of the Year beef, but that's a non-serious topic.
Abuza's like kind of an antagonist, like in general with this weekend and everything.
He's said like small guy to super.
Yeah. So I mean, I'm not accosting him. I am not criticizing whatsoever. I love that. We need more of that. We're going to talk about probably challengers teams just real quick. But if anybody has like last second questions or anything you want us to talk about before we hit the 2 hour mark, please put it in either the Twitch or YouTube chat, and we'll get to it after we're done. Challengers finals, obviously we don't cover challengers at all throughout the season, but I think considering it does tie in to EWC and the fact that this is the biggest event for challengers, it is of note. So just Omit. So there's Omit and there's Omit Brooklyn. Omit won Challengers Champs this year's Challengers Finals. Vivid, Craze, Mac, and Mamba were the team. Obviously, Mac and Vivid being on CDL teams throughout this season. Mamba and Craze, I think, were both rumored at one point to be joining C9, if I'm not mistaken.
Craze was. I don't remember Mamba.
Maybe not Mamba, but yeah, definitely Craze. Congratulations to those guys. Obviously, that not only gets them I think they get medals for Challengers Finals, so they get a medal for that. They also get an automatic qualifying spot at EWC as one of the 4 Challengers teams. Joining them will be Omit Brooklyn, which is all former CDL players, Brack, Yuli, Standy, and Prolute. Then there's Team War, which is also all former CDL players, Assault, Diamond Con, Lins, and 2 Real. And then Team Orchid has a mixture of former CDL players and Challengers players. So Team Orchid is Bance, Henry, Mythics, and Lucifer. Those are the 4 players and the 4 teams that will be joining the CDL teams at EWC, which is very interesting. I think we saw last year some pretty good players on those Challengers teams. They're not roster locked, if I'm not mistaken. So these rosters, I think, could change, right?
Something happened last year?
I think Omit Brooklyn's team got poached, if I'm not mistaken. Because was it Boston that picked those guys up, or picked?
It was the 3. Yeah, it was Purge, Awakening, and Cammy. Yeah, that's right.
So I think. So these are probably not locked, or I don't know when the roster lock would be. So these rosters might change, but those will be the 4 teams joining them. I think that's an interesting list of players because, ideally, especially when I think of challengers, I'm thinking like, the players that haven't been here before, like the players that are trying to make that step up for the very first time and get into the CDL. But the vast majority of the players that are going to be EWC are either current or former CDL players. And I think that is just the state of the challenger scene right now, where it is overwhelmingly dominated by former pros. There's not a ton of like up and coming talent that hasn't already been scouted or is like in the process of
Well,
moving back up. But Mercury's probably would have been in there, but fate had it and decided that he was ready. He was ready before he was probably going to get there. So I don't know if there's a Mercury's level talent waiting currently in challengers, but I guess we could see a EWC.
but I don't think we're going to see it at EWC necessarily, but that's the thing about challengers. And like, there was the whole drama with Envoy and Super earlier this year. And I mean, even Super to an extent, just because he's, not an NA talent. Um, it's like for all of these top teams that are seeing success in challengers, they are mostly former CDL pros, but at the same time, there's still these couple diamonds in the rough with guys like Super, Mercules. I'm not going to include Neptune in that bunch because he did have previous CDL experience,
Yeah.
but like, Hook was in challengers at the start of this year before the Pred situation. So like, that gives me hope for challengers and the extent of like there is potential for some unknown quantities to make a name for themselves. I don't know if we'll ever see anything to the extent of what Mercules did
No.
this year again. But that at least, even if we're looking at these four challengers teams and we're seeing a majority of players who were previously CDL guys, is still hold out hope for the unknown quantities and challengers that can make a name for themselves, especially in a game like Call of Duty where literally you play a different game every year. So if somebody, gets hot first challengers event of the year, you didn't know who he was, that can completely alter the course of their whole season and their whole life.
Yeah. And I think Craze and maybe Mamba as well have went back to back at Challengers finals. I'm almost certain Craze did. I just think he's gonna be called up. I couldn't imagine unless it's a Mohawk situation, which always baffled me until it stopped baffling me and like it made sense a little bit why he might not have been called up at the time that he did. But Craze is, he won. I think he was stage 3 elite MVP this season for the North American region. He was obviously, like we said, he was at least rumored to be pretty close to joining C9 before Major 4, if I'm not mistaken. So this year, I'm just looking up his COD Gamepedia. They're trying to serve me too many ads at once. So he did not. Oh, he didn't go back to back at Challengers. He went back to back in this season. So he was with Neptune, Fellow, and Lunars, obviously 3 players that did get called up. He was the only player from the first Omit Brooklyn team. They won Stage 1 Elite Playoffs. Stage 2 Elite Playoffs, he won with Fellow, Cap, and Rex. Again, all players that got called up to the CDL, which would really piss me off. Dallas Open, they get top 12. Then they win Stage 3 major playoffs with Exceed, Mercules, and ProLoot. Obviously, Merc gets called up around that time as well. Didn't do too well at Miami. And then finish with DreamHack Open winners with Mamba, Vivid, and Mac. Obviously, the same team that he wins Challengers Finals with. So I think there's a really, really good chance that he gets called up. I don't know the case with Mamba. Vivid, I just don't see it. Like, obviously it didn't work out for Carolina to drop him. He also just didn't light the world on fire in the CDL to the extent that he's going to get another opportunity. He's been on like 4 or 5 CDL teams already. And at that point, there's are teams that kind of get a little shy from, picking him up and giving him another chance. Mac is more interesting though, because this was the first year for him back in the CDL. C9 just in general did not seem to have a great season. So I think there's a chance that Mac gets back into the CDL next year. But again, we're going to see what happens, I guess.
I just really liked Mac's tweet after they won. He said, "Challengers champs" with the trophy emoji. I don't know why the F I'm down here. It doesn't get much more cut and dry than that.
Yeah. Well, might not be too long. Um, and one last thing. So scrap MVP, like we mentioned, I think all of these, but scrap MVP, like we thought Rancor Rookie of the Year, like we thought the All Stars, which they call Scuff Team of the Year, but the All Star teams were the first team is exactly what we had predicted: Scrap, Celium, Hydra, and Simp. And then the second team was Rancor, which I think we both were kind of leaning toward. Draza gets the second AR spot. Joe Deceives gets the second team SMG, and then Abizi gets the second team SMG, which I think Neptune should have been there. I think you also think that Neptune should have been there. If they pulled him after champs, I would like to see what the voter breakdown would have been just to play with it. But I don't think he was nearly as well received as we predicted him to be.
And I think that kind of, what I feared and what I said in our voting episode was that the top 12 placing for Vancouver right before the end of the regular season may have impacted Neptune's standing. But at the same time, Neptune was number 4 for SNG voting from the fans and number 4 from coaches and GMs too. I thought that was a little interesting. It was really Abizi was number 7 in the fan voting, but he was number 3 for players and number 3 from talent and media as well. So that's the difference there. You mentioned maybe Champs changing things for Neptune. I think Champs would have changed things for Shotzi, who from the player voting was ranked 14th.
Yeah.
In terms of how many votes he got. And I thought that was the most eye-opening thing for me in that. And at the same time, Dashi was 12th for the player voting as well. And I think that, full circle here for this episode, really, that goes back to just those those OpTic struggles earlier this year. Like the other players are just 3 top 8 placings, first 3 events of the year. They weren't buying into, giving OpTic guys an all-star spot when they had struggled for 3/4 of the events before champs. And I thought that was another. I thought if the all-star teams looked a little different, then maybe an OpTic guy would have snuck in there. But I think I'm okay with Rancor getting on that team. I think Ghosty gets the short end of the stick 2 years in a row as potentially the 5th AR, at least based on the regular season. I was really surprised with Abizi, though. Obviously, I'm a huge Abizi guy. You mentioned it even earlier this episode. We had that debate for the entire Cold War year. You were Team Simp for MVP. I was Team Abizi for MVP. So I think highly of Abizi. I just, he statistically, I think it was the major 3 cycle, had some of the worst hardpoint stats when Atlanta was struggling in hardpoint. But I think the players and GMs and talent and media voting probably just leaned into a little more of not the legacy, but just the totality of Abizi's career as opposed to just this regular season.
Yeah. I find these all-star voting tables fascinating because you get to see not only the fan vote, which is I can guess a lot of times with the fan vote, generally what it's going to be, but the players and coaches vote and the GM vote, that is very, very intriguing to me. The fact that, like you mentioned, Shotzi was 14th on SMGs among the players. So he's about as far down as you can get, where they'd actually start considering you. And it wasn't like he wasn't the top fan vote or the top talent vote or anything. Yeah. He was 6th for both of those. Coaches and GMs had him a little bit higher at 9th. But I just thought that was interesting. Neptune was loved by fans, but also loved by the coaches and GMs, but wasn't valued as highly by the players. They had him 8th, talent media 7. Real, our boy, 6th by the coaches, 6th by the players. That makes me feel really good about his future in general. I was trying to find, though, so if you look at the AR voting, there's Scrap 1, Celium 2, Rancor 3, Dashi 5, Ghosty 6, Draza 7, Super 8, Abuza 9. Who the hell is 4 on this list? Like, who could possibly been the 4th highest fan vote in ARs?
All right, let's just go through it.
Because obviously the OpTic
Kenny?
guys, Dashy's up there. Like, is it Kenny?
Kenny or Attach?
I guess.
Those are the first names that I can think of for people who wouldn't have been mentioned. Hold on. So Thieves, we got Ghosty and Scrap on there.
Yes.
FaZe, Draza, and Celium. Maybe it was Insight. Beams and Insight for Toronto. Abuza and Nasty for
I don't think it's Nasty.
Vancouver. Yeah, I don't either. Miami, we got Rancor, and maybe it's Super.
He's on this list.
Super's there. Okay. Carolina, Slasher, and Rex / Vivid. No. OpTic would be Dashy / Kenny / maybe Skies. I don't know. Boston, I can't really think of it. Maybe Geo.
I think it's Kenny. Like, it's that just makes the most sense. That would be
Sib.
Yeah, maybe. I'm still leaning Kenny because he would have to be so far down on the player, coaches, and talent list that, like, even a 4th place finish in fan voting couldn't even get him 8th place on AR. So I'm gonna say it's Kenny. I just thought it was interesting that that person is just completely missing from the list. But yeah, I think it's like, if you just kind of want to get a gauge on what the entire league ecosystem is kind of thinking about these players, at least going into champs, I think there will be some different opinions, especially about like Dashy and Shotzi, for example, after champs, and maybe even some of the FaZe guys, to be honest, like, just considering how poorly they finished. But you know, I think it's something to consider at the very least, with how people are viewed after this season. We could just mention it. Fringe added ranked play. I don't know if you have the energy to rant again on this, but I just thought it was pretty funny.
Yeah, that's exactly what I'm thinking. The fact that it's actually being added to ranked play with the season 4 reloaded update when it effectively can't be used in competitive at all. That's just a giant waste. We've talked about it over the last couple months whenever it was officially announced and whatnot. Only thing, if it's being added to ranked play now, there is some time before EWC. It's possible that if it plays really well, it could be added for EWC. I would personally really like that. I think the players would be against it, though, just because, not a ton of time to practice it for almost $2 million tournament and whatnot. But we'll see what happens on that front.
Last thing, Pick'em. I'm like OpTic. I went back to back. They didn't think I could do it. They thought after Major 1 that I was out, but I'm back. 9-5 at champs, 167 and 85 overall this season. You went 7-7 at champs, 165 and 87. I think it was the Vancouver over Miami. That was like the one that pretty much sealed it, because you said, like, whoever you don't pick in grand finals, I'm going to have to pick. And
I had to pick them to have a shot to tie. So,
and I was like, I'm definitely going to pick OpTic, like, regardless if it was Boston or Vancouver. So, congratulations to me. Congratulations to you on another silver surfing season. We could just call you the Atlanta FaZe of the CDL season.
I didn't even think, do we count EWC towards Pick'em? We might have to pump the brakes here. I don't know what we did last year.
I don't think we counted it, but
I don't think we did either, but who knows?
Precedent says no. We don't count it. Unless I do well at EWC, and then we'll count it, and then I get win twice.
I don't think we did pick them for EWC because it was like the matches at multiple times, and
it's also group play, right?
Track. Yeah.
Yeah. So
I don't think we did it, but whatever.
But yeah, I mean, obviously it's a pretty great season for both of us. I don't know what the record ended up being based on the talent for the CDL this year, but I would imagine it was, pretty good. Like, I think that's like a 66% win percentage, which is decent especially for champs. Like, we went 9-5 and 7-7. This is definitely like our worst event or worst part of the season, I think. I had some rough stretches.
I was bad in Major 3 when I was fully on the Minnesota train and picking against Boston.
Yeah.
That in conjunction allowed you to catch up.
I think I also think I went hard for OpTic in Major 1, and that did not pan out for me.
I think we both went the Major 2 cycle with OpTic there. That was an interesting one because I remember several matches are like, well, they can't possibly lose this one, right? Yeah. And then they still got swept.
But overall, another great CDL season in the books. EWC starts in 3.5 weeks. It'll be in Saudi Arabia. 16 teams competing at that event. The 12 CDL teams, as far as we know, granted last year had 11 of them. And then 4 challengers teams joining them, the ones that we listed a little bit ago. But we appreciate you guys stopping by, whether you're watching or you're listening. We very much appreciate the support we've received all season long. This has been, the most active chat that we've ever had in Ego Chall Podcast history. So we've had so many messages in the chat that I can't go back to the very, very beginning. But Milk, Texteezy, No Hairline, thank you, Reese, Spubsy, Ismail. If I'm missing anybody, I'm trying to quickly go down the list. But we appreciate you guys stopping by. Crazy Snail as well. Josh Kitching, AF. Midnight. I think that might be it. Alex as well. Charles. There's so many people on this chat. And we just, absolutely love that you guys enjoyed it. I saw a few messages that said that this was a very fun show for them that while they were watching. We hope that if you're listening after the fact or watching after the fact that you enjoyed as well. This has probably been the longest Ego Chall Podcast episode ever too. Like, I don't know if we've had a 2-hour episode in our history.
Not either.
We've gotten pretty close, I imagine, but it's been a long one. It's been a long season. We've really tried to up our game in terms of the consistency. This has been the most episodes that we have had in a season before, because this was the first year that we had 2 episodes a week. We hope that you enjoyed the season. We hope you enjoyed this season of Ego Chall Podcast episodes. We plan on trying to keep some semblance of a schedule. Of course, EWC is in 3.5 weeks. We do probably have some roster changes to talk about. The next thing that we could talk about next week could be the fact that LAG is shuffling around their coaching staff. We mentioned it, but we didn't really go into any detail on that. I'm sure there will be some kind of roster changes, in the actual players over the next week or two as well, especially before EWC, like we saw last year. Omit Rafi, I think, is the real one. So appreciate you stopping by as well. But yeah, this is it's been great. It has been an honor to serve you as as your co-host, as one of the 2 co-hosts. Shout out head Ego Chall correspondent Trimmer, who still is winless in Pick'em. He was in the chat a little bit earlier. But yeah, we appreciate you guys. Please like, subscribe, follow the podcast feed wherever you're listening or watching on. 5-star rating on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. Follow us on Twitter at JBink with 2Ks, at Pres Byers, and the podcast Twitter at Ego Chall Podcast. Next show, we'll wait and see. I think we'll probably do it at some point in the next week, but I don't want to promise anything, and we don't really know exactly what we have to talk about until things start kind of falling into place. But I've rambled enough tonight. I have rambled enough for an entire season. Thank you very much, and Bink, take it away.
Yeah, thank you guys, as always, for all the support. Like Preston was saying, way too many names in chat, especially compared to some of our other streams. But I'm pretty sure I saw us get up to 40 viewers in the YouTube chat, which, I'm pretty confident in saying that's the most we've had on a YouTube stream. So really appreciate all the love you guys showed today. If you guys get a chance and you like the content and whatnot and want to just drop a subscriber to the YouTube channel, that'd really mean a lot. Trying to hit 300 before the end of the season. We got a couple tonight, so would appreciate that. But yeah, very long show, like Preston said. Had a blast breaking down champs. Tons of great storylines and everything. Very fitting end to the season for not only the CDL but for us in terms of just having so much to talk about that we literally rambled for almost 2 hours. So I had fun. I hope you guys did too, listening along and all that stuff. But yeah, we'll be back soon. Not sure when, like Preston said, but when we are back, you will see us live. So yeah, until then, thank you as always, and remember to send the chow.